Hi, everyone. I'm Manisha, and this is Teach Your Kids. So I often talk about modular learning on the podcast. And when I speak about modular learning, I'm referring to families who are curating their children's education so they can build the best possible experience for their unique child, definitely academically in terms of their intellect, but also socially and emotionally as well. And in my experience, there is almost no one that I have met who is more passionate and committed to building a curated education for their unique child than my guest today, Jeremy Howard. And Jeremy is the founder of Fast.ai, which is, I think, the largest course on AI and deep learning in the world. And he's a data scientist, a researcher, a developer, an educator, an entrepreneur. He also founded the Masks for All movement, which I think was one of the largest changes in behavior we've seen, people wearing masks during the pandemic. And Jeremy was my first customer on Modulo, and we still work together today. We collaborated all through the pandemic, every single day almost, on making Modulo what it is today. He spent countless hours observing classes and offering feedback. I often refer to Jeremy as my unpaid CMO because almost all of the customers we have came through Jeremy, who was just generously sharing his content and promoting Modulo in our classes. And he's just had such a profound impact on how I think about education, the role of technology and learning, human health, science, and just becoming a better human. He's really challenged me and changed my views. And, you know, Jeremy, it's just really weird to me. I often marvel at how close I came to not meeting you. Like a lot of building a company is about hard work and commitment, but then some things are just luck. And I met you because I sent you a cold email asking you to give a workshop on masks for kids. And then you happened to see in my, signature that I was building a company. I had really no idea what I was building at the time. And you showed up at my open house and I said, well, I think I'm going to build this. And you said, well, why don't you build this instead? And I said, okay, sure, we'll do that. So, it's so wonderful to have you today. And we've had so many great conversations. And I just think it's really cool that we can share some of that wisdom with people listening today. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Manisha. I don't think there's anything I could say or do that'll live up to that. So maybe we should just wrap it up here.
Sure, great.
Otherwise, it's going to be a disappointment for everybody when they actually hear what comes out of my mouth and be able to like,
I know. I seriously doubt that. I have a lot of questions for you today, so be prepared.
Sure. I love talking about education, so I'm all for it.
Wonderful. So I thought that we could just start on a personal note and what led you to do modular learning, to choose to fully curate your child's education. We were working together on your child's education during the pandemic, and then your child went to private school, and then you decided that this was kind of the path that you were going to take moving forward and not go back to private school. And you really put considerable research into this decision. And I was just wondering if you could kind of walk us through your thought process when you started thinking about doing this, what you learned and how you came to this.
So I'd say we didn't choose it. It chose us. So our daughter went to a Montessori preschool in the year before the pandemic in San Francisco. She really enjoyed it. She was never in any hurry to come home because she was having a great time. There was no particular sign she was learning anything, but that is fine. I mean, it's preschool, we just wanted her to be happy, and we also wanted space to get our work done. So everybody was happy. And then this thing called COVID hit. And my wife and I are data scientists, so we studied the data for it kind of in early to mid-February and thought of 2020 and thought, like, based on this, it looks like it's likely to be a global pandemic and it's likely to cause a lot of disruption. So we decided, and we also thought everybody's probably going to get locked down for a while. So we decided to move to a quiet area whilst the world went crazy. And so we left San Francisco before the lockdown happened, and that was nice. We got to be somewhere nicer to hang out in San Francisco, but we still had this problem of like, okay, well, there's no schools. And in fact, there was no, schools were closed in San Francisco for a year. We didn't want our daughter to be bored, and we didn't want her to be doing nothing. And we also wanted to continue to be able to get our work done. So we weren't sure what to do. I will say, though, already at that point, Claire really enjoyed playing with like iPad apps, like I guess most kids do. And I'd noticed that there were some really great iPad apps, for learning the basic phonetics stuff, learning the basic number stuff. She enjoyed them at least as much as garbage learn nothing at all apps. So like they were the only apps that she had access to. But we also thought there's no particular reason to limit the amount of time she spends learning math and reading and stuff. So we let her do it as much as she wanted. And so already at that time we had a sense, I had noticed that she kept on being able to do a lot more than I expected her to be able to do, just because she was playing with these apps, and they were adjusting to her rapidly developing skills faster than I was, so they were kind of saying like, okay, now you're ready to learn this. And I was thinking like, she's not ready to learn that, but she was. And of course the app knows better than me because it's probably seen thousands of kids go through this process, and I've seen zero. So yeah, then we got in touch, as you say, for reasons nothing to do with Claire's education. I think we talked a bit about this idea of like, kids seem to, at least Claire seems to like playing with these apps, but she really she's super sociable, so she'd really like to hang out with kids, maybe have like some basic level of supervision, but otherwise maybe we could basically leave her alone. And I guess that's kind of what happened with us for the first few months of the pandemic, is each day, it was a bit more than that. She spent a few hours basically on Zoom with some really wonderful human beings who you found for us, including sometimes you yourself, who were like saying like, okay, we're going to play with our math apps for an hour or half an hour or whatever. And then if kids want to talk about something, they just start talking, and then they're chatting. And then from time to time, the adults would be like, okay, let's do a quarter of an hour of yoga now, and they'd watch like a cosmic kids yoga video. It's like, okay, let's do some art now, and they'd follow along with an art video. And it really felt like they were taking advantage of the best resources that were out there, rather than having some random adult teach, do all those things. It's like, oh, here's Mo Willems, one of the greatest children's book illustrators and authors, teaching our kids how to draw the things that they're reading. I was like, wow, it's wild.
Makes me think about how much you influenced me, because at the time I felt like I was a little bit anti-screen time.
I definitely got that from you. Yeah, I got that.
Yes, you definitely got it. I didn't. You were very good at negotiating my strong reactions to things. But I was planning this program like, okay, let's have 2 hours of social emotional club, and maybe a teacher once a week to check how children's doing. And Jeremy says, well, what if we did 16 hours or 40 hours of screen time? And I'm thinking, what? I think there were two things that really shook up my perspective. And one was, you really showed me how physical screen time can be, and that it wasn't a kid, staring in front of a computer. There were very simple things you suggested, like,
and not sitting,
like every 20 minutes, taking a break. There are very simple things. I remember I would be teaching once, and you would say, what about a jumping jack break? I think this would be a good thing to integrate. And then I think number two was just, leaning into technology instead of away from it. So you had the idea of, we can have the best teachers in the world teach them. Why, use just ordinary Joe Schmo? So we ended up, choosing these amazing YouTube instructors, and then combining that with in-person people who would like stop the videos and ask questions. And then we got the adaptive learning apps involved. So yeah, that was amazing to me to see how that unfolded.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's meant that, like, honestly, Manisha, as you probably know, we don't really care at all about the speed at which Claire learns. Like, we're not trying to create Albert Einstein or something. Like, we don't care. We just want her to be happy, But we've noticed that her and all her friends seem happiest when they're learning, when their curiosity is being sated, and it seems impossible to sate the curiosity of 6-year-old kids. So with these adaptive apps, they're the only things I've found, that are able to keep up with Claire's rapidly growing and changing interests and capabilities. So after the pandemic, as you know, we actually not after the pandemic, during the pandemic, but we went to Australia, which is where I'm originally from, to live. So we migrated back. And Australia, at least in Queensland, where we settled, didn't have a pandemic. Like, the borders were closed, so there was no COVID. So everybody was at school and everything was fine. We found a really great school in our local area, a wonderful community school, very engaged head of curriculum, and the principal were both super supportive when we arrived, and we didn't know what to expect because we'd had preschool and we'd have a year, and then a year of these modular kind of classes, apps, videos, random stuff.
Yes, this
we're all trying to
randomness.
figure stuff out
Right.
as we went, and I'd have no idea what the outcome of all this is going to be. It's not like you can look up on the internet and find out, because it's not been done before. So when we got there, during the initial walkthrough of the school, we said to the person taking us around, who was like an admin person, look, our daughter's had a pretty weird last year, but it seems like she's developing like unusually quickly, but we don't know. But like, she was meant to be going into prep, which is like, what would you call that in the US, the year before first grade? Prep, kindergarten. So we have a bit different here. We've got like a year of kindergarten, then a year of prep, and then first grade. So she would have got into the year before first grade prep. And they were great. They said, oh, let's talk to the head of curriculum. We went straight there, and the head of curriculum said, oh, I've got half an hour now. I'll give her some tests that we do. And so she did some tests, and it was like mind-blowing for us that she came back and said, like, okay, Claire is at 5th grade level in reading and math. And so that puts us in a difficult situation, because socially she's a little preppy, but reading and math, she's a 5th grader. And so they had a cool idea. They basically said, okay, we're going to put her in the 5th grade math classes, and then we'll put her in 1st grade everything else classes. And she loved it. She had a good year. She really enjoyed that year. She made loads of friends, but also she didn't lose any of the friends she made through Zooming for the previous year. The problem was we noticed a change in her behavior, whereas she previously had this insatiable appetite for doing new things. Then she not suddenly, over the period of the next few months, became the opposite. She didn't want to try any new things at all. She would get very upset at the worry that if she tried a new thing, she might do it badly. She might get it wrong. And she would get very emotional about this. And we thought, it's hard with little kids because we've not had a little kid before. She's our one and only little kid, So we thought, like, okay, I guess maybe this is a stage kids go through. But, eventually I spoke to somebody whose kind of expertise is in like kids who seem more kind of accelerated with their studies. And she said, like, oh yeah, this is normal for kids like this. And what's happening is it's called perfectionism. And it's happening because your kid is sitting in a class all day where she's not being stimulated and she's getting everything right. But she's tuning out because she's got to sit there for hours listening to stuff she already knows. But then when the teacher asks a question and she gets it right, she gets told, oh, good girl, Claire, good girl. Like literally at the end of the year, she got a certificate for being a good girl. And so she wants to be a good girl. And so the worst thing would be to try new stuff because there's no new stuff you do at school. You just rehash old stuff, you get it right, and you get badges, you get stickers, you're a good girl. And so that was actually, it turned out, even though she was having a nice enough time, and making friends, it was actually, kind of socially and academically a bit of a disaster, because it was destroying her, her enthusiasm. So that's why we, despite, they were a great school, they did everything they could, but in the end, we just thought, like, maybe this isn't working. And then what happened was we opened up the borders in the state. COVID came in. Everyone got sick. They had to cancel school. And so we had to do homeschooling anyway. So Claire did stuff with some of the people that you had introduced us to for a few weeks. And the change was remarkable. Like, this time it was sudden. Like, within a couple of weeks, she was back to her old self. She wanted to, for example, to take something at random, she used to really enjoy playing chess. She'd love to play chess with me. And then for that year she was at school, if I said, like, would you like to play chess? She would start crying. I'd say, okay, let's not play chess. So we didn't play chess for a year. And then suddenly she's like, oh, can we have a game of chess? Or she would want to play piano. She wanted to do things. She wanted to try things. And we thought, oh, wow, okay, so it really seems like in-person school is kind of sucking the life out of her. So maybe let's not keep doing that, because doesn't seem to be suiting her,
And during that time, you did do some research into the education system. And I remember you asking me, like, why is it this way? What's going on? Could you maybe share some of your insights?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so basically the last term of school, I switched. This might seem like overkill, but I switched to full-time research on education. So I spent 4 months reading papers, listening to interviews with teachers, reading books. And my mind was like opened up to this whole world of brilliant people who spend their entire lives thinking about how to help kids with their school years. There are so many great ideas. And then I looked at schools and I was like, nobody's doing any of these ideas, but and I was stunned. And so, like, for example, the study that well, the what is it, 2 Sigma or whatever study that showed that kids who get tutoring on average end up in the top 5%, academically. Like there were these signs that there are ways for kids to learn a lot better. I also learned a bit about, for kids that like Claire that do learn fast, what I had always heard, which is make sure they're with their same age peers, is dramatically wrong. It turns out that kids of that type that are kept with their chronological peers, on average, are in the bottom 5% after school finishes, socially, and, depression, happiness, all that, they're a disaster. They have terrible outcomes. If they get accelerated by 2 or 3 years or more, they end up in the top few percents of those same measures. So kids need to be in a peer group of kids like them that they can, communicate with at their level. And I learn about, adaptive learning systems, and I also learned about the ways in which classrooms are, by their very definition, constrained spaces, where most classrooms, a teacher stands up and basically delivers a lecture and then gives people a sheet of questions to do. And so many teacher interviews I listened to talked about how the teachers spent most of their time in thinking on behavior issues, making sure that all the children do what they're told to do at the time they did it, that they do it, that, the most disruptive kinds of children are the ones that learn the slowest or learn the fastest. So any kid who's, outside the mainstream is going to struggle in this environment. And so after kind of reading hundreds of papers and books and listening to hundreds of hours of interviews, I came away thinking, I'm not sure schools, as currently set up, are able to take advantage of what we know about how to give children a good education. By good, I don't just mean academic results, but, also social and emotional results. And I thought, I'm pretty sure we can give Claire an environment in which she will do better on all three of those dimensions than she could at school. And let's try to take advantage of all of this research, and then hopefully at the end of, however many years of education she decides she wants to do, she'll come out feeling fulfilled and happy and with lots of good friends and ready for her adult life.
For sure. And I love that the education system is so hard to penetrate and change, but I think that the parents do have the option to opt out and do it in the way that's best for them. And I love that you took that leap. And I mean, I was a teacher in classrooms for many years. And I think probably the most frustrating thing to me was that there is all of this evidence about better ways to do things. I mean, we know that children need sleep in order to learn, and yet kids are having to get up at 5 a.m. to take the bus. We know that children need more play, and yet we give them 30 minutes of research, not just, because it's fun, but for their cognitive development, they need to play. And
that's the other thing, right, Manisha, is I learned about, and you would know this well, but I had no idea, talking to homeschooling parents of how do you find the time? And they all say it takes an hour or two a day to get through the curriculum. School days are filled with getting from class to class, dealing with administration, dealing with behavior, they have to teach at the speed of the slowest kid. Everybody we spoke to and all the online resources we saw were okay, if you want to make sure your kid at least stays up the curriculum, budget for an hour or two a day. And I just thought, that blew my mind,
It's really wild. And I mean, we saw that during the pandemic, our kids with these adaptive learning apps, I mean, they would just go through the whole K through 8th grade curriculum in 6 months. It was just done. And when so much time is wasted, they all did it.
It's not like we all carefully curated some group. It was just whichever internet randos happened to play your thing ended up on the same Zoom together. And they all went independently. And they all ended up at 5th grade math level after 6 months. And they all started, they're all 6 and 7-year-olds. And now so they've all become, those parents have all become our friends. And now we're all in the same state of what do we do now? Because they can't really go to a normal school anymore,
Yeah. And I think this concept of learning at your own pace. And you have this amazing course where you're democratizing learning about AI and deep learning. And you have this ethos that anyone can and should learn these tools as we move into a future where AI is going to be part of all our lives if they are given the time to do so. But it's so rare that we actually give people the time to learn at their own pace.
Yeah. And also, with these tools, the world that our kids are going to grow up into is different to the world that we grew up into. And so our schooling system and our teachers have all been developed for the previous generation world. And so I hear all the teachers all talking about how do they make sure they can ban ChatGPT in the classroom and ensure that no children are using AI for anything. And I'm the opposite, in our house. I'm if Claire asks me a question, I'll be let's have a discussion about that. But first of all, have you checked with Bing? Have you had a conversation with Bing or ChatGPT about that? What have you been able to learn?
Sure, use the resources available.
Yeah, then quite often, I won't really know. And so I'll say okay, well, let's see if there's a Kurzgesagt video about that or something else. We'll watch it together. And it's nice as a parent because a lot of Claire's homeschooling now, just like she is like, so now she's 7. She's very rapidly got to a point in a number of subjects where she's reached the limit of my knowledge. So now when she's learning something, we can learn together, So, another great example, which actually did not come through modular, but came as a recommendation of a friend we met through modular, is this amazing thing called biochemistry literacy for kids, which it's basically a Yale professor of biochem who had this crazy idea that he reckoned that 7-year-olds can learn biochem if taught the right way. And it's all about like being age appropriate, right? It's not about slowing it down. It's not about dumbing it down. But it is about adding a lot more princesses, castles, unicorns, magic. Do you know what I mean? Like making it kid friendly. I think that helps for adults too, but particularly for kids. And, so he took this group again of a bunch of internet rando kids who just happened to find this website. And after, I can't remember, like 20 lessons, they had gotten to protein folding, and the guy who runs it, Daniel was like, all my colleagues told me a 7-year-old could never learn protein folding. But there they all are. They're all learning protein folding, and it's really cool. He got everybody to get to buy these kind of plastic molecule building kits. So they're all like putting it together with their hands, and everybody downloaded this computer software called PyMol, which is like literally professional level researcher software for molecule development, and the kids learn to, play around with the molecule viewers and stuff. And yeah, none of the kids struggled with it at all. And in fact, sometimes even like one really cool thing was the way Claire discovered she could do things that seemed more difficult than she believed she could do, right? So one class, this terrified me as well. The teacher said, okay, by next class, you need to learn the 20 amino acids. And like you need to, if I show you a molecule structure, you need to say what it is. And so the homework that week was that one pager, and it said like, okay, memorize the 20 amino acids. And Claire, I said to Claire, okay, you can try to work on this. And I came down 20 minutes later, and she'd written a single sentence on the piece of paper. And the single sentence said, I can't remember, it was something like, "This is totally impossible." And I was like, okay, that's how I feel as well. So I was like, okay, well, we've learned a bit about remembering things. What do you know about remembering things? And it's just like, oh, we've learned that you need like stories and mnemonics, and we need, to use something like Anki. I was like, okay, let's do those two things. So we've got to do 20 by next Monday. All right, so let's do 3 a day. So let's come up with stories. So like, let's look at this first one. What does that one look like? It's like, looks a bit like a dog. Okay, what's the dog's name? What's the dog doing? Okay, why is it doing that? And then like, what's that got to do with the name of the amino acid? And so for everyone, each day we came up with fun 7-year-old stories. For each of the amino acids, they made friends with each other. They had life goals. They had challenges. Some of them were always hungry. Some of them ran around too much. Some of them were naughty. And then each time we then put into Anki, which is a repetitive spaced learning software, we use like the picture, the molecule, the story. And after 3 days, she'd crossed out, like again, I guess came down, she'd like crossed out the sentence that said like, this is totally impossible. And she'd written a new sentence, which is like, this is very hard. And I was like, oh my God, she's like, literally, I'm watching her revise her belief in herself in real time.
Incredible. It's so cool. And you have, I think you mentioned Anki, and I think this is really cool. Is this is like a learning strategy that kind of comes from AI? Could you tell us a little bit more about it and how
It actually comes from psychology.
Okay.
Yeah. So it comes from a guy called Ebbinghaus in the 19th century who did this really boring study where he tried to remember, I think they were triplets of letters, A-N-G, B-C-X, like he'd write 33 long sequences of letters or something like that. And then tracked his performance and how well he could remember them each day. He'd then plot a curve, And so he discovered that there was this kind of very predictable forgetting curve that was this kind of like drop off rapidly and then less rapidly. It's kind of pretty standard shape to this curve. And he then discovered that if he quizzed himself on them the next day, and for the ones he got wrong, looked up to see. Obviously, the curve went back up to where it started because he's relearned them all, but then it was flatter than the previous time. And then if he re-quizzed himself 2 days later, it would be flatter again. If he re-quizzed himself 4 days later, it would be flatter again. And he basically developed this system for optimizing review timing, and the reviews specifically have to be review quizzes, not review reading. So it's this active recall, this process of forcing your brain to try and remember something, and doing it on this kind of exponentially growing schedule, causes your brain to not forget things. So Anki is a program which basically implements that review system. So it asks you questions, basically the questions you put in, quiz questions about things that you want to remember, and it asks you on this exponentially increasing scale, unless you get one wrong, in which case it resets it. And so when I introduced this to Claire when she was like 5 or 6, I actually started I said to her, Claire, how would you feel if I told you there was a way to be guaranteed that you could remember for your whole life anything you wanted to? And she said, I mean, that would be amazing, but Dad, you've told me there's no real such thing as magic, and that would be magic. So I never forget that. I was like, no,
Wow.
It's not magic. It's science. And like, let me
I love that.
Sit down. I'm going to teach you about this experiment this guy called Ebbinghaus did. At the start of the year, our kind of first year of COVID in Australia, we weren't sure whether we were going back to school. And we talked to the principal about it and said like, okay, well, here's the things that are going wrong. Here are the things that are going right. And they were like, yep, that all makes sense. Well, how about we do some experiments? Like for math, like there's a gifted learning program where they basically go through, I can't remember exactly what it was, but something like the first 3 years of high school math in a single year, but that's in our college as opposed to our primary school. So what if we got a teacher's age to drive her to the college each day for math, and she'd join this thing, and then for the rest of the time she'd be with her normal classmates. We're like, yeah, we could give that a go for sure.
I could just imagine little Claire sitting next to all these college students. I see it.
Okay, so here's an interesting point, right? With accelerated learning, going up 1 year seems socially bad, both from the studies I've seen about outcomes and also just anecdotally. But like for Claire, when she was actually prep age, but she was doing grade 5, and then ended up she did that too fast, so then she started doing grade 6. It worked great because the age difference was so big that she wasn't at all a threat to the other kids. Like they treated her like a little baby sister, and they all felt a lot of tenderness towards this little kid. So it actually worked socially very well, and I think there was a certain amount of amusement when she would like answer the questions in class or whatever. But that actually worked well. One that did not work well as much, I mean, it wasn't bad, it didn't work great, was they put her in a kind of a grade 4 advanced English thing where they discussed more serious stuff, and they did a podcast together and they talked about ethics and moral philosophy and whatever. And that didn't work, right? Because, like social emotionally, Claire's not at all advanced, so she wants to talk about castles and princesses. She doesn't want to talk about nuanced ethical questions, So anyway, what I was going to say with this thing about like going into this high school thing is I again do want to do some research. So I bought the book they were going to be doing, and it was basically year 7 and 8 Australian curriculum. And I read through the book and I was like, this is weird. There's literally only one new thing here compared to the primary school curriculum, which was square roots. So it covered exactly the same thing as the Australian primary school curriculum, plus square roots. And that was going to be her first 2 years of this high school math curriculum. I was like, that's really weird. And so I spoke to some friends who had done Australian teacher training, and I was like, what's going on? And they said, like, oh, yeah, that's how our system works, because the kids need to know that as at grade 9 that they're all at the same level. And so people could have had a wide variety of different primary school backgrounds. So the first 2 years of math in high school, we make sure everybody's caught up to the same place, besides which some of them might have forgotten it.
Over the summer, a lot of kids forget stuff, for sure. Yeah, so much repetition.
And so we ended up saying, like, okay, let's not do this gifted math thing, because, like, it was just like primary school math, but less fun. Like, you know, in primary school math, at least they had this really cool app actually they used at her school called Matific, which is just, I can't say enough good things about it. It's really good. And it was super colorful. It was full of monsters and, you know, dancing monsters and monster fashion shows and fun things and explorers in hot air balloons. And then you get to high school and they cover exactly the same thing, but the 6 years are compressed to 2 years, but they make it all boring, you know, like really boring. So in the end, yeah, we were like, okay, let's not do grade 7 and 8 math. Instead, she just learns at her own speed, you know, and another thing I learned from listening to lots of teacher interviews is teachers spend most of, I mean, you'd know better than me, but vast amounts of their time, particularly in math class, revising what they were meant to have learnt 2 or 3 years ago. And because the classes don't like connect really, you know, and so the kids don't remember what they learnt 2 or 3 years ago because people don't. That doesn't happen with Claire, because the things that she wants to remember or that her teacher thinks she ought to remember go into Anki. So for her, it's a constant, continual growth rather than like learn a thing, forget a thing, learn a thing, forget a thing. And I think this is something anybody could do, but it would require schools to be like way more integrated between subjects and between years, you know, particularly subjects. Like so much of the stuff that she does in physics and biochem and math, like they all overlap so much. And so, you know, it's very difficult, I think, to really get that in a normal schooling environment.
So what would an ideal education system look like for you? I mean, I know we're not in a position to wave a magic wand and integrate all of this, but maybe you could humor me. Have you thought about, you know, what if you could wave that magic wand, how would all of our children be learning? What would it look like?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure I would throw away everything we have. Like, I think you need to start from scratch, because I don't think there's almost anything worth saving. I think it's great having a group of kids get together each day and see the same kids. I think it seems, from what I understand, to be better if those kids are a bit more mixed in terms of age, for example. But, you know, in terms of like, what do you spend the day doing? You know, I wouldn't have them sitting. I really wouldn't have them sitting. I wouldn't have them like having to keep quiet or having to keep still. And I would not have it, I wouldn't have a teacher there to teach. You know, I would have a supervisor or coordinator there to like make sure that everything's going okay. But on the whole, I would much rather the teaching was done by like slickly produced, beautiful videos, engaging games, you know, things really designed. Like one of the biggest struggles I heard from parents, particularly during that first COVID year, was kids spending too much time on Prodigy. They would not stop playing Prodigy. Oh, right. Prodigy's a math, like it's a math, like it's math videos, math quizzes, and it's like literally lockstep with the US curriculum. And parents are like, oh, My kid's addicted to Prodigy. I swear, she would play it all day if she could. Like, okay.
Let her.
Is that bad?
Jeremy, I actually just interviewed the CEO of Prodigy, and it's extraordinary what they've done. I mean, they have based it on a video game, Pokemon, really, and they have built in both extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, and it seems so simple, but they have done such an amazing job. Like, what he talked about is like keeping kids in the zone of proximal development, so it's not too hard and not too easy, and so they still feel that challenge. And I mean, it's amazing. So I want to talk about screen time, and you've done a comprehensive review of screen time, which is really interesting.
My wife Rachel has done the best thing on this, which is she did an article about it a while ago where she drew a Venn diagram, and she's like, "This is screen time." So, like, what's screen time? Well, it's something where you're looking at a screen and people are like, oh, look, there's these academic studies that show screen time's bad. And then every time somebody tells me an academic study says something, I always read the study. Studies are generally nuanced, and what they actually say is often very different to what people think they say. All the studies I found were of kids playing computer games on their own. And if kids play more than 2 or 3 hours of computer games on their own every day, that's probably not a good idea. But you probably didn't need an academic study to tell you that. And then that gets described as screen time. But most parents I know use the word screen time to quite reasonably think of it as time looking at a screen. So so Claire's grandparents live interstate and overseas in Melbourne and the US. We love it when she's talking to her grandparents. Is her talking to her grandparents on Skype, which is screen time, is that bad? Should we discourage that? Should we limit the amount of time they spend each day talking to their grandparents? She watches these biochemistry for kids videos and then has regular Zoom sessions in which the kids and the professor get together to talk about what the video says. Do we have to limit that? Stuff like Prodigy, which is literally curriculum-aligned math quizzes. And, even like Minecraft, which Claire adores, nearly all the time she does in Minecraft, she's building houses, hotels, aquariums with her friends, collaboratively designing a city following her weekly Minecraft club time in which all the kids together learn about some new math thing or physics thing or a Minecraft specific thing or whatever, and then that week they all build stuff using these new ideas that they've learned about. This is all screen time, right? So my wife Rachel's Venn diagram was like, okay, does it have a social aspect? Does it have a educational aspect? Oh, passive versus active, So is it like watching or doing? Even if it's only 2 of those 3 things. If it's active and social, chatting to granny, If it's learning and social, doing biochemistry, learning together, all of those things seem likely to be very positive. And even those things which are like, active and educational, like Prodigy, this is all screen time. And I've seen no studies to suggest that there's anything negative at all. There are studies that show a kind of passive screen time effect on learning, which is interesting, which is a kid, if there's like kind of a TV on in the background and somebody's talking versus an actual human talking at them, the kid will engage more with the actual human and pick up more of what the actual human says, which is fascinating. Although I do wonder if even that effect, like they didn't really study like, well, what happens like in Claire's case where she spent a couple of years now mainly learning from people over screens. Like and from an early age, there's never been any sign that she's in any way less engaged when she's talking to somebody on a screen.
quite the contrary. And, I think, one of the things, there's a really great review of mastery learning, which talks about adaptive educational software, and it has a huge impact. And then one-on-one tutoring has a huge impact. And I think what you helped me do at Modular was to actually combine the one-on-one tutoring with the adaptive educational software. And then our results have kind of blown through the roof.
And it's getting harder as well. I don't know if you've noticed this, Manisha, but there's a lot more apps available for 6-year-olds to learn phonics than there is for kids to learn biochemistry principles.
I do want to talk about that. And before we do, there is one point you made that I want to dig a little deeper into, which is that you said, we were concerned about screen time, so we read a study. And I don't want to take for granted that you are an exceptionally talented data scientist who really knows what studies to look for, how to read a study, check the sources, check the research methods. And, I often feel completely overwhelmed by all the information flooding at me. And, I think that a lot of time my go-to strategy is just ask you what you think. Find someone who you trust, who knows how to analyze data. And, I remember I was like, Jeremy, should I take one vaccine or the other? No, it's fine. You can take them both. But I do have the time, homeschooling is my area of expertise. And I do have the time to take that time to really look at homeschool studies, see who funds them, what factors people might be ignoring. I don't think there's a lot of good data in that field. So my question is, if you're a parent listening to this and maybe you're not a data scientist and you feel really overwhelmed by, you see a study that maybe vaccines cause autism or that screen time destroys the brain of a developing 3-year-old, how does the ordinary person, find out what's true and what's not?
At least in education, I think a lot of the studies are written in a reasonably approachable way. I would, if you read something in the Daily Mail or something that's new study shows screens are destroying kids. The first thing you could do is just ask, does this match with my own observation? Right? Because studies are meant to tell you something about the world. And if you've noticed that your kid gets off a Skype call with grandma and then seems sociopathic, then that would support the study. On the other hand, if you've observed that they seem pretty normal and actually they had quite a nice time, that would not support the study. And so, if a study goes against your own observations of how the world actually is working, trust your own observations, right?
Yes. And so I guess another question that I have, we were talking about adaptive learning apps, and you told me about Beast Academy, which is
Beast Academy.
Yeah.
I know, it's so great.
It was great until you finished it.
Yes, it was great until we finished it.
But that was the problem, is that we go through these apps so quickly. So maybe tell me, I do want to hear about why you love Beast Academy, because I think it deserves some time. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about what tools or technologies you would like to see built, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs in this audience, and I think it would be good to give them some ideas.
And let's not just talk about Beast Academy. Let's also talk about learning math.
Yes.
I was never that excited about learning math when I was growing up. Philosophy was what I did at college. I was not really into school, full stop, and yeah, but it's been interesting, looking at what's really helping Claire. Claire has a lot of questions, and she's got things she loves. Most of all, she loves space, and she wants to know more about space. And the challenge is when her knowledge about space is much more advanced than mine, in a lot of ways. And so for us to be able to, she wants to learn more. So for us to be able to advance that knowledge, we have to find stuff about things that she doesn't know about. And generally when we do, it's pitched at a college level. And it's full of math, And so she's frustrated because she doesn't understand what they're talking about, Or she wants to know more about, so my wife, her mum, Rachel, is studying immunology. Claire's very interested in watching the immunology videos with her, and they're often full of chemistry and physics. And then we try to learn about chemistry and physics, and again, there's lots of math. So we've really noticed that math is a it's this kind of consistent thing that underpins a huge number of other subjects. Oh, also she loves coding, and she keeps noticing like she wants to do coding, and suddenly like a lot of it involves trigonometry. And it's like, okay, if you want to make this actual bouncy ball that's bouncing on top of this cute cat's head whilst she's licking her, bowl of milk, you're actually going to have to use trigonometry, So math keeps on popping up. And the other thing about math is it's so many layers built on top of each other. It's really different to a lot of other subjects we do, where you can just like learn, like, okay, we're going to learn the facts about comets and asteroids or the Oort cloud or whatever. It's like, it's fine if you don't know about Venus, you can still learn about asteroids. Math is not like that. There's an order you have to do things in. And, you can't learn about complex numbers if you don't know about square roots and negative numbers. And you can't know about square roots if you don't know about exponents. You can't know about exponents if you don't know about multiplication. You can't do multiplication if you can't add. And you can't add if you can't count. So I'm keen to help her go down this math journey because it opens up all these other things. And so, there's a couple of different ways to get good at math. So before we get to Beast Academy, I'll say I'm super fond of manipulatives. So manipulatives are things that you pick up and move around. And that's great for building up number sense. Like if you can really understand that 6 times 8 can be represented by taking 6 blocks, putting them in a column, and then creating 8 columns of those 6 blocks, and then counting the number of blocks you've just multiplied. And Claire loved it when she first learned that then you could rotate that rectangle by 90 degrees. You've now got 8 by 6, and it's the same number of blocks. And congratulations, you've just done a geometric proof of the commutative property of multiplication. So there's this game I mentioned called Matific, which is basically the entirety of prep through grade 6 curriculum done as virtual manipulatives. So virtual manipulatives are things where you're moving stuff on a screen rather than physically. And I actually prefer this to physical manipulatives because you don't have the setup time, you don't have the cleanup time, you don't have the cost of creating the different things. And also often the manipulatives will be like dancing robots, or gorillas protecting their bananas or things that, they're more interesting than colored blocks. So that's one direction that's particularly great. And then there's the more symbolic and abstract level, which can be represented by plus, minus, times, and divide, or algebra with your x's, or graphs, or whatever. That's where Beast Academy comes in. So Beast Academy is a series of books, which are cartoons, and the cartoons are all about an academy for gifted monsters who are practicing and learning for math competitions where they generally compete against robots, for example. And so, and each monster has a very definite personality. And the kids love the personalities of the monsters and the stories. And so that's actually really important, like critical. If you don't engage the kids, then what are you doing? And a lot of like fancy math professor types are kind of like, oh, if the beauty of the math can't engage the kids, then it's pointless.
I mean, math is part of our world, and they're making a connection to the world through those colorful images and stories.
Yeah, so it's great stories, but then, the most important thing, of course, is that they're teaching good math. Now, the thing is, the math they're teaching is basically the kind of the prequel to something you know about called Art of Problem Solving, which is basically the math curriculum that has created all of the US Math Olympiad champions over the past few years. And before this curriculum existed, America had no US Math Olympiad champions. It's basically the curriculum responsible for putting America
on the math map. Yes.
These stories of these monsters are showing absolute best-in-class ways to think about primary level math. And it makes primary level math way more interesting because, sadly, primary level math largely consists of teaching people to do plus, minus, times, and divide on their head or on a piece of paper, neither of which are useful skills at all.
Or memorize formulas and certain ways to solve them.
Yep, exactly. Algorithms of like, here's how you do 3-digit multiplication on a piece of paper. So like one of the interesting things I did differently with math is I introduced Claire to calculators when she was 5. And I said, please never do anything on a piece of paper that you could do on a calculator. And I also introduced her to the Japanese abacus, the soroban, when she was 5, because that's the most awesome, manipulative and super fun. So, so basically if you're doing Beast Academy, it's way more interesting because they find the elegant underpinnings of the boring primary school curriculum. So for example, they spend a lot of time thinking about factoring, which is just multiplication and division. But, they spend a lot of time talking about like prime factors, all the things you can do with prime factors, and then greatest common divisors and least common multiples, and the kind of the underlying important bits of real number theory in math, so you kind of come out the end of it knowing the primary school math curriculum, but understanding at a much deeper level, such that, they generally say like, oh, most kids should probably do the Beast Academy book about 2 years under their current grade level because it's a much more sophisticated thought process. Oh, but can I say our new thing?
Yes, the new thing. So we ran out of Beast Academy. That was the tragedy.
We ran out of Beast Academy. It only goes to grade, 5 or 6. And then you can do art of problem solving. And then the problem is art of problem solving, great curriculum, but not pitched at 7-year-olds. No colors, no beasts, no robots.
I have found that people have a distinct preference for the online version, which is an adaptive learning app, that's adapting to what the children learn. So yeah, continue. So no adaptive learning app in the older grades either.
So there is another amazing thing called Elements of Math Foundations. And I'm very excited when I discovered this.
Ooh,
so
this is new to me.
Okay, so there was a thing called New Math in like the 50s and 60s and 70s-ish. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was called New Math in the US, which was basically an attempt to recreate the math curriculum from scratch to be more aligned with how math is done in the 20th century. Because the math curriculum that was done before that time and the one we have now is more aligned with math as it was done in the 18th century. So in the 20th century, real mathematicians think of math in a very different way to the way it's taught at primary school and high school. So there was this attempt to reboot the math curriculum to at least get it to kind of like the state of the art as of 1920. It didn't work. It was a big thing, and it didn't work because teachers didn't understand it, because the math teachers had never learnt the 20th century math. And the parents hated it because they didn't know what the hell their kids were learning. And it was a total failure. Anyway, during that time, I'm thinking it was 50s and 60s. Anyway, during that time, there was, as part of this huge thing, an attempt to create more of like a gifted math program that would take, I'm forgetting the details, but I think it's like grade 5s or grade 6s and get them up to college level math in 2 years. Like get them to the point that they could start college level math. And again, this is talking like real math, modern, 20th century math. And that wasn't successful either for the same reasons. My understanding is a couple of schools in the US kept it. There were some teachers who were just like, this is a gift to humanity. We have to do this. We have to use this. And they kind of kept it alive, but it basically died. And the way I understand it was that kind of sometime in the 2000s, someone like came across these boxes and boxes full of this new gifted math curriculum and put the whole thing online and created a new online platform to teach this new math. And that is what Elements of Math Foundations is. And it's totally unknown. Like even you who know everything in this field have not heard of it. It's amazing. It's totally unknown. And it's but it's literally decades of work from like extremely dedicated top of the line math teachers and mathematicians. And so Claire and her friend have been doing it basically all year. And it's crazy because like it takes you right back to square one.
So I think this actually does lead me to something which is really at the core of my own work, which is the just profound lack of confidence that a lot of parents feel in their own abilities, especially with regards to math. And I know Rachel talks a lot about this, and I'll explore it more deeply in the show. And I think, it's important to acknowledge that some people might be listening to this and thinking like, okay, well, this is all well and good for two data scientists, professors, entrepreneurs, genius parents with their genius daughter, and, but this is not going to work for me. I don't know how to teach my kid,
that's not the message coming out.
No,
it's not about genius at all.
Okay, well, I'm just saying is that, maybe I should use the G word, but, okay. The reason I say this is because, first of all, I have heard this a lot from families, and that they say, well, I could never teach my kids. I'm not qualified to teach them. And then, the other aspect, Rachel wrote this wonderful article called "My Family's Unlikely Journey to Homeschooling," and someone posted it in Hacker News on Y Combinator, and I think someone replied, well, that's all well and good for the cognitive elite, but not for someone like us. And so I would really love to hear your response to that. That I believe that any family, any parent can teach their children, and new technologies and tools have emerged. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this are.
Look, I think it's fine for your kids to learn stuff that you haven't learned. Like, as I say, like Claire, well, her biochemistry is far beyond mine. I know almost nothing about biochemistry. Her astronomy is far beyond mine. And she loves that. She loves quizzing me and seeing me not be able to answer her questions. But I never, ever say like, oh, I'm not a biochemistry person or I'm not an astronomy person. I'll be like, oh, that's great. Can we learn more about that together? And so like we very often in the evenings will sit down and watch a YouTube video that she selected, so that she can help Dad learn about this thing. So like I take a genuine interest in what she's learning about. And kids, Claire, but it seems I think most kids, like they can be interested in almost anything. I remember one of the things you got us all into was Epic, which is this kind of kids' book library. And, quite often she'd just sit there browsing Epic. And, one nice thing is for the parents, you can see what books the kids are reading. And yeah, I remember one day she read, they're all pitched at kids. They're all like colorful, books. She had read like a kind of introduction to optics, and then an introduction to cheerleading, and then a story about alligators. And I was like, which ones did you like best? And she's like, oh, they're all great. Let me tell you about cheerleading. So, kids, I don't know. I think kids, until it gets sucked out of them by school, enjoy learning things. I think they enjoy being able to teach their parents about things. Like one thing I found really striking in listening to teacher interviews is a lot of teachers absolutely explicitly refuse to say, I don't know. And they think it's really important that they show their kids, that their kids can have complete trust in them. I feel the absolute opposite.
Same here.
So I love saying, I don't know, and like, let's figure it out together. I think, so I guess I think it's fine, at some point, hopefully, we all hope that our children will outstrip our capabilities in some areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so many good tools that have been created or being created to support learning. I mean, if you are a parent, your child can use an adaptive learning app like Prodigy, and you can sit there and help them and Google together. We've kind of talked a little bit around giftedness in this podcast, and I've learned a lot more about the gifted diagnosis from you, and learning about the Davidson Institute and how the child's mind works when they are kind of absorbing all this information like a sponge, and the challenges associated with that. And one of the things that I've learned is that if your child is struggling with perfectionism, one of the best things that you can do is model learning something hard, that's something hard for you. And that can really help your child learn to push past difficult things.
Yeah, definitely. Like I really try to make sure that Claire can personally observe me struggling to learn something new. So and we try to also, I've also tried to have us learn new things together, So for example, I bought us both skateboards. And so she got to see me not be able to stand on the skateboard. And of course, because she's younger than me.
Can we include a video of that?
Of course, because she's younger than me, she picked it up faster. Yeah. And so she'd be standing there scooting along on her skateboard and be like, Dad, how come you can't do it yet? I'm like,
right. Lovely.
I don't have the adaptive brain of a 7-year-old, so I'm still working on it, but I'm not going to give up.
They're much less diplomatic teachers than we are. So I remember you once asked me for recommendations for electronics curriculum, and I sent you a list of recommendations, and you wrote back, "That's not electronics, that's robotics." And so I went back and I revised my list and was grateful for the modification. And so Jeremy, you are, you run fast.ai. You've appeared in shows talking about machine learning and AI, and I'm wondering what kind of skills you think children should be learning for the future that maybe aren't necessarily included in a typical K-12 curriculum. I mean, it's kind of absurd that kids are still not learning how to code, but I was wondering, for parents listening, are there any other skills they might want to consider, having their kids learn?
Look, I don't know, Manisha. The world's changing far too much. And
so much.
And we're talking 10 or 11 years before Claire's 18. So I don't... Like I kind of said, I don't care. Like, I'm sure she'll be fine. Like, everybody's fine. Like, if you think about the ways in which, people who aren't fine, how are they not fine? And okay, I know lots of people in their late teens who were not fine, but the ways they're not fine was generally they're depressed, they're taking drugs, they've blown their money on something stupid like gambling, it's not generally they're not fine because they aren't good enough at linear algebra, so my focus really is much more on, making sure that, Claire feels, self-confident, that she's able to communicate her needs clearly, that she knows when to step away from situations. I don't try to protect her from never seeing or hearing or being involved in anything unpleasant, but being able to recognize when things are not okay, and feeling like she can handle stuff, that she's handled stuff before and she'll handle stuff again. So one thing that's been good, for example, is she's somewhat recently started doing a weekly chess club that another homeschooling parent set up. So this is all Zoom-based. And one of the nice things about Zoom-based things is she's got friends all over the world, so she doesn't find it at all weird if somebody's chatting to her from, she can tell me about Morocco. She's got a friend in Morocco and, whatever. Anyway, there's one kid in her chess club who's some kind of extraordinary chess prodigy. I think he's only a year or two older than Claire, but he's got a I don't know if you're familiar with ELO ratings, but there's a number that basically every chess player in the world has. His ELO rating is like over 1800, which would make him like an extremely strong, extremely strong adult player. And I think it seems like, so Claire's like not a particularly strong player. She's like, for a regular 7-year-old chess player, she's probably a pretty regular chess score. Not that there's many regular 7-year-old chess players, so she's better than the average 7-year-old, but I don't think she's better than the average 7-year-old who plays chess once or twice a week. Anyway, but she seems she's kind of the next best in the club. So basically every week she seems to be put to play against this chess prodigy. And of course, every week she gets her ass kicked. And it's been great, because she used to hate losing. And now she's just so familiar with losing, and she'll be thrilled if she'll tell me if she like got into a slightly strong position for a couple of moves or whatever. And then after like months and months of this, one week she beat the other kid, and it was so cute. The whole chess club, like they had these, like everybody had these little reactions on the screen of like confetti, and they organized a, championship ceremony for her, and the kid who got beaten was really sweet about it as well, because of course he's used to winning all the time, so he was very supportive. And yeah, I think that was a nice example to me of getting used to the idea it's okay to get your ass kicked again and again, but also that doesn't mean that you won't ever find a win.
Yeah, and recognizing you have strengths and you have other areas that are more challenging for you, and to admire people who are strong in one area, and
just enjoy the process,
Exactly.
So I don't know what she's going to need when she grows up. I mean, in a sense, people might look at what she's doing and think like, oh, Jeremy's obviously being very strategic about this, because she does spend a lot of time learning coding and math, but it's not strategic at all. She likes it. Like, honestly, all kids seem to like it. Like with coding, that's an area, there's a million apps. And they're all good. They're all good, You don't have to optimize. I guess the other thing I'd say to parents, don't optimize these things. Just pick one. It doesn't matter if it's the third best rather than the first best. Like, just do something.
Yeah, like have your kid try it. Just try it. You don't have to commit. See what your kid likes. And
Claire did every coding app.
She did everything. Claire has tested so many different apps for me. I mean, I really used her. She's watched hundreds of different YouTube channels. We would just go through them. Do you like this? Do you love this? Medium. Okay, off the list. Every single app. She's easy. She's easy. Yeah.
And particularly, with the coding apps, she'd go like all the way through and she'd finish it, and she's just like, more. So she enjoyed them, and they're really fun. They're all, there's one that involved helping a cat, get to her. I can't remember what it was, her pet bird or something. There's another one helping a robot get back to its spaceship. They're all basically the same.
Oh, yeah,
app.
Math Tango, I think. Yeah.
Oh, well, Math Tango's, that's not coding, but I know what you mean.
The robot, yes.
Is pretty cool.
Right. A different robot spaceship scenario, yes.
And so, I mean, she's a good 7-year-old coder. She's not a good coder under any other definition, but she enjoys it. You've kindly hooked us up with a 14-year-old girl who also is an enthusiastic coder. And, there's another thing that's great is, she's able to now 2 or 3 times a week code with a 14-year-old girl. And they had such a lovely relationship. And she's in Singapore, which is nice. Yeah, and they'll chat for hours. They'll have to go in and be like, Claire, you should let her get off the phone now. She might have other things to do.
And this tutor's parents are so excited about this too, because, teaching is the final stage of mastery, and it's a great work experience and so good all around. Yeah.
And they're both learning together as well, because they're doing a kind of a coding thing that neither of them were familiar with, called P5JS, which is basically something where you can use JavaScript to make kind of interactive art, I guess. And it was a good step for Claire, because like when they start, the kids all learn these block-based programming systems where there's just like a list of blocks of things you can do, and you'd like drag them over here and connect them together, which is not how any real programmer codes. Real programmers code by typing in code. And so P5JS was her first experience of typing in code. And that's been great because with this system, you don't have to do much code to have really nice things appear. So they're building all this stuff from scratch. And I don't know how these kids' brains work. They're so creative that she'll just sit down at the start of the hour and be like, okay, today we're going to like create a little bird, and we're going to create little places that the bird can go and drink from. And each time it drinks from a place, it's going to change color until eventually it turns pink, at which stage it's going to fly up. And she'll just like, stuff comes out. And it's like, okay.
It's wild. And, it sounds to me, and from what I've observed, is that really at the core, you love your daughter so much. And your focus has been on nurturing her socially and emotionally so that she can become a lifelong learner, and nurturing her ability to learn through grit and growth mindset, and making sure she's in an environment where she can learn, and feeding her curiosity about the world. And, I think that I agree,
I'm sure she'll be fine,
Sure, no question.
I'm sure she'll be fine.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a data scientist, I try to focus on the data, and what the data tells me is the things the number one thing I should care about is depression and anxiety. That's the most likely problem that any child's going to have in their teen years. And so I'm not going to put any pressure on her about anything. I am going to make sure she feels competent and ready and supported and loved. And so, so many parents are really focused on like terrorists and child predators and like things like that. And like all the time you're spending teaching your kid to be scared of the world, you're actually making it more likely that those things that statistically much more likely, depression and anxiety are going to take them away from you.
Parents have so much fear themselves to begin with. And I think that...
so much. Of course we do, because we want... the worst thing in the world would be if anything happened to our child. So
anything
every part of my brain wants me to protect her at all costs. And so I have to fight really hard against that to be like, don't listen to that part of your brain, you have to make it okay and be okay with her falling over and bumping her head sometimes, or failing sometimes, or
sure, or showing, and I think about school and academics, and how, for me, when I went from being a teacher in school and a private tutor and kind of helping kids get into Harvard and Stanford and whatnot, to discovering the homeschooling community, and then all of a sudden there was just a paradigm shift in my way of thinking, where just this way makes so much more sense. Like, of course you would want to do one-on-one learning with your child 1 or 2 hours a day and send them to classes and cultivate. We have no idea what kind of skills they're going to need in the future. We need to nurture them so that they can handle whatever comes their way and be happy and whole and confident. It's just so simple. But I think the reason it's so hard to take that leap, my feeling is that it is because of fear. We assume, like, if they don't learn these academics, like, these people must know something that we don't know, that they're going to be lost in some way.
One interesting thing, though, is like statistically, I know the statistics and the studies aren't great, but from what little we do have, it seems that homeschooled kids academically do at least as well or maybe a bit better than kids that go to school, which blows my mind, because one group are being taught by trained professional teachers who do nothing but teach all the time, and the other are being trained by parents who have jobs, and yet despite all this, they do at least as well as kids that go to school in an hour or two a day, And the other thing I really like about, socially about how things have worked out is Claire meets a much wider variety of people much more often than she would at school. It's a bit of a stress and a bit of an inconvenience to parents like us, but the fact is homeschooling things come and go. So there'll be like an out school class for 4 weeks here on, learning about dog breeds, and there'll be a, YouTube series here about mushrooms or whatever. But it does feel like a continuous struggle against like, okay, these 3 things are finishing this week. What are we going to replace those with? But something that is nice is that she is like, there is this consistent group of kids that she sees pretty much every day. But most days she will find herself in an environment with a new adult and new children at least once. And she's just got so good at that now. Like, it doesn't bother her at all. She's straight into it. And I like that it's kind of made her kind of like trusting in a good way. Like, she knows that most people are kind, thoughtful, trying hard, imperfect, that kids from all over the world, from all different walks of life, she can relate to, that they're all just normal people like her. And so she kind of like, she's able to dive in very rapidly and acquaint herself with a group of people that she's with and interact with them in a positive way. And I think that's really nice. And I think it's very different to normal school, where people have their own small little cliques, And her best friend, she's never met in real life, even though they'll speak for hours every day. And her dad's become one of my best friends, and I've never met him either.
And it's so wild. I mean, I think, I remember like a former Secretary of Labor was saying, well, the problem with homeschooling is that people aren't exposed to diversity of thought. And saying, well, in a tiny little neighborhood school, you're not exposed to diversity in homeschooling. I mean, you're meeting all kinds of people with different opinions and different countries. And
not only that, but you're in this incredibly controlled environment where the teacher has spent a lot of time learning how to keep control of that environment. I mean, I don't think it's good. I mean, I noticed this when I was teaching this Masters of Data Science program, that I was getting kids who at least had gone through undergrad, but they were still had so little ability to proactively think for themselves. Like, they really expected things to be structured for them and fed to them, and they didn't feel, to me, ready to deal with the real world of real jobs, And I think school teaches that, it really teaches you to fit into a structure and follow a structure and
get given a structure.
Yeah.
I don't think that's proper grammar, but your structure is provided to you. You don't build your own structure.
So, for me, I'm an academic and an entrepreneur, and I think those are both valuable things. There's value in fitting into a big corporate hierarchy, but for me, I would expect Claire would probably rather not be somebody who just fits into a big corporate hierarchy. I think a lot of people I know who seem, fulfilled in their working life are people who aren't just working in some slice of a big corporate hierarchy. But that's really what schools prepare you for.
Sure. And what's interesting is that people who are in school who start homeschooling when they're in their teen years often have extreme difficulty with the freedom. But people who are homeschooled and then decide to try school as a teen have no problem fitting in. It's like a game for them. Like, oh, this cool new structure, I'll try it out. So that's kind of a funny, I guess, paradox in a way, is that you're actually able to adapt to different situations with more flexibility. Oh, Jeremy, there's so many more facets of this that we could probably dive into, but probably it might be good to wrap it up. So I'm going to finish with a question I ask every guest. This show for me is fundamentally about passion for learning. So is there something that you're learning right now, ideally completely unrelated to anything we've talked about today, that you want to share? Could be about a new type of insect or self-help category, neuroscience, anything.
Yeah, I mean, it is related to something, but I've been very, very deeply in the last month engaging with the research around, large language models and ChatGPT and stuff like that. So I found it really fascinating, actually, because In particular, there's this whole world of open source hackers who are trying to push these kind of large language models forwards outside of the usual big companies, Microsoft and Google and stuff that are doing them. And so I've got to know a lot of these people, and it's been really cool to see this huge amount of engagement and enthusiasm, and a kind of concern also with people, a lot of people saying like, oh, this new brand of AI has powers that we haven't seen before, but gee, all of those powers currently seem to be owned by a small number of really big American companies. That can't be good. Let's try and do something about that. And so it's been fun, actually, for me to be starting to get involved in these communities and to try to help them. It feels like, back in the 70s, I've read stories of something called the Homebrew Computer Club, which was a group of people who bought the very first little like Apple I or Altair personal computers when they were kind of like, you could still see the chips and capacitors and like boxes and whatever, and they were like buying these things and getting together to be like, oh, we think these computers are going to be something one day, and let's figure out what we can hack together with them. It kind of feels like that. Feels like we've got this new technology and this new community around it and this new open source hacker ethos. So that's been really fun.
That is really fun and exciting. And, I think that I'm finally ready to start my fast.ai course and start really diving into some of these principles. Yeah, it's time. Tell everyone, where can they find you? How can they get involved in your work or follow you? What's the best place to start?
I got a website, fast.ai. That's probably the best place to start.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts today. And I'm really excited for people to listen to this episode. And we have a Substack where people can comment and ask questions. I will definitely be responding to every question. I hope maybe you might weigh in as well, Jeremy. So thank you for being my mentor, my friend, for just all the many ways you've really challenged me, ranging from screen time to how I think about giftedness and just as an entrepreneur. I just really appreciate our friendship and the many years that we've had the opportunity to work together. And
thank you for helping to pioneer this and provide some kind of central coordinating thing around this new thing we're all trying to figure out even what the hell it is that we're doing.
Monday, and I'm still trying to build a movement and build the technology to support this kind of learning. And, it'll be fun listening back at this episode in 1 year, 5 year, 10 years and seeing how far we've come.
Well, thanks, Manisha.
Thank you, Jeremy. Enjoy your day, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.